And I think we are live. Hello and welcome from springy Switzerland by now. My name is Patrick. I'm from Swiss production company Solar Productions, and our main business is to go on tour with bands and making sure that the tours happen. So I'm on tour myself as a tour manager quite often, and this is how I met today's guest, Mr. Kevin Stewart-Panko.
Hello, bonjour.
Canadian, huh?
Canadian, yeah.
Do we want to start with just telling people how that, or like what Corona did to us? I think you were on tour, right?
I was out with Origin and Beneath the Massacre. Didn't really think much about what was going on, or I shouldn't say it. Thought a little bit about what was going on in listening to the radio and the NPR and stuff like that in the States on the first couple of days before the tour started, but it didn't really hit until actually the first show when people were talking about stuff being closed, people losing their jobs, all that kind of stuff. Because when you're on tour, you're in your own little bubble. And we were determined to all right, we're just going to do it as long as we can. And that was basically 4 days. So, I came back to Canada with Beneath the Massacre, and when you come back to Canada as a traveler, they're recommending, now it's a requirement, but at the time they're recommending a 14-day quarantine, self-quarantine isolation. Long story short, I couldn't go home, so I ended up in a hotel, and I've been here for 12 days now, banging my way through DVDs and books and food. Got a kitchen. It's not actually a bad setup for me anyway. I mean, I'm having enjoying the my surroundings, which I can't really show you, but anyway, yeah. So that tour basically was supposed to be a solid month, like I said, 4 days, and yeah, here I am where you are. And where probably everybody else is too.
That's painfully correct. So, but that means that you're probably deprived of talking to people. So we can talk some now.
I mean,
Yeah. No, it's crazy. I mean, the whole, and this is why we're trying to start to do this. Is our first time ever trying to do this and just doing it. This web series, the Corona Chronicles, is I don't know if it's the final name, but the current name, because I mean, our whole industry is just that big fat pause button was hit, and now we're just sitting here and staring at the wall and trying to figure out what to do. And the longer this situation goes on, I mean, just Download just got canceled. Another couple big festivals now got canceled. So we'll see what it brings. But what better to do than to talk about what we usually do and which we can't do right now. I mean, for us, we were supposed to have 2 tours with Elevati, 1 big tour with Heilung, a couple of one-off shows with Heilung, and then of course, the festival season starting in June, and the way it currently looks is it's just not happening. So here we are.
Yep. Here we are.
And actually, why you are such a great person, I think, to talk about this or in general. And our first topic for this first series will be, just crossing borders with bands, because I think that's one of the, anyway, it's one of the topics that I find getting the most questions about too, from people who are not necessarily from our field.
Right on.
And it's always interesting. And most of all, why I thought of you in the first place was because you wrote this book together with Justin Smith called "Do You Have Anything to Declare?" And I was actually able to hunt down a copy, which I don't even think you were. I think you have 1 copy, right?
I said, yeah, I have 1 copy at home. That's all I have left. And I'm not even sure. I guess if you scour the internet enough, there's copies out there. Last I heard, there were Revelations distro and Deathwish Inc.'s distro had copies left over, or still available, I should say. That was the second pressing, and I guess they're all gone. I have no idea. Like I was saying before, I mean, Justin, who was my co-author, he took care of most of the business. I took care of most of the writing. He took care of most of the business. That was the sort of deal we had laid out, and he did the distribution and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
I mean, I know we met on that Heilung tour, you and I.
Yes, that's how we knew.
Yeah, that's how we met. And you have in your email signature that you wrote this book. And after we met, I looked for it, and I think I found one copy and had it mailed to me from Australia, actually. So, and
Wow,
a friend of mine,
great.
a dear friend of mine who lives in Australia, she's like, yeah, but I can't find it anymore. So maybe I snuck the last copy. I don't know. But maybe do you want to go straight in and like talk about it? Like, why did you decide to write a book about bands crossing borders?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm pretty much a writer by trade. I am a freelance, music journalist or whatever you want to call it for a good portion of my life. I've been doing it professionally for over 20 years now. And I'd always had people ask me about, hey, are you ever going to write a book? Are you ever going to write a book? And you also have to remember that book is a good 6 years old at least. And this was a time before metal books or just books about the underground music and extreme music in general. There wasn't really a big scene for it. You had Choosing Death, you had the books that Tom Warrior wrote, some of the Martin Popoff books, but there wasn't as big a market, or at least a book scene, as there is now back then. So I just never really thought about it because I just never really considered it as like a viable thing to do. Even though I had a lot of people approaching me about it, and I also never really thought I had a good idea. So what happened was that co-author Justin Smith, his band was playing a show in Toronto, where I'm sort of live around, and we just got to talking. And as usual, whenever a band comes across the border from the States or from wherever, one of the questions you always ask, hey, how was the border crossing? And we got into talking about their particular border crossing because they were touring with a band from Canada and actually all in the same band together. So I just wondered about the complications with that. And we were talking, and he's like, you know what? If you ever want to put any of this stuff down on paper, I'll put the book out on my label. And I said, all right, you're like one of the cooler dudes that I know. I know that you do good work. I love all your bands. You're, awesome to deal with, et cetera, someone I can trust. So I decided, all right, I'm going to do it. And 2.5 years later, there you go. There's the book. And it basically started with the idea that, as most bands would tell you throughout the 80s and 90s, probably beforehand as well, that Canada was a really difficult country to get into for a touring band. Now that's changed a lot in the last couple of years, but that was the premise of the book. It was supposed to be all about bands crossing into Canada, how difficult it is, blah, 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 blah. And as I started doing the interviews with a lot of the bands that I interviewed, I discovered that there's stories from around the world, all kinds of crazy border crossing stories, getting into countries, flying into countries, even stories of bands going through the Schengen zone, about the troubles that happened there. So I decided, there's a bit more to this than just Canada and the United States. So there you go. The book itself is divided into different, each chapter's got a different theme. There's stuff about touring through Russia, Japan. There's stuff about being shaken down at borders by military and corrupt types. There's stuff about experiences with drug dogs. There's stuff about, I shouldn't say illicit, I should say unintentional drug smuggling or alcohol smuggling, stuff, just wacky stuff. And it was just, and I just getting stories together and creating a theme for each section and building a narrative based on what the interviews had, and put it all together, and that's the book. And I have one copy. And you have one copy.
And I have one copy. One very important perspective, I think, is the time, right? I mean, when did you start touring again? Or when was your first ever tour with your band?
I originally played in a band, and we toured from mid to late 90s until just before 9/11, so 2001. So a good 5 years probably. obviously things got very different after 9/11.
Yeah.
My touring as a, sorry, I was just going to say my touring as a musician, that was my touring as a musician. Anything I've done after that has been just either hanging out or traveling as crew or whatever. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. I mean, the time perspective, I think, is very important because, you know, borders are constantly evolving. And I've been touring since 2012 now, and even within those 8 years, you know, there's been some crazy developments. Some borders get a lot easier over time. I mean, I think Schengen. So for those who don't know, all the European Union plus some more countries, except for the UK, but I mean, that's a whole other story. Anyway, have this Schengen area, you know, within which you don't really have border crossings anymore. I mean, that has made stuff a lot easier, I guess, because I haven't toured really before that. But it's really interesting how some of the borders, like when I read through your book, and also from my experience, like some of these borders are considered the most notorious ones. And it's funny that you're Canadian and I'm Swiss, because I think that amongst the touring bands, the Canadian-US border and then whatever Swiss border, you come in, we're surrounded by a couple of countries here, seem to be the most notorious. Do we just maybe just want to talk about that a little bit? I mean, you have a lot of stories about the border between the US and Canada. Do you have a couple ones ready?
Well, I mean, non-specifically speaking, I just remember growing up in Toronto and going to shows where, especially in the mid to late 90s, maybe even before that too, where you'd constantly have touring packages where one band didn't get into the country, or the band would get into the country, but they'd be playing without a bass player, or they'd have to do a show where it was instrumental because one member in the band, it was just really, really rough. And there's countless stories from anybody who's ever toured through that era of just how much of a pain in the ass it is to get into Canada. And I mean, even recently I was talking to Kevin Sharp, ex-Brutal Truth vocalist, who's in Lockup and or is it Lockup or Venomous Concept? And he was saying that, you know, he remembers going into Canada, and a lot of the times it was almost like they were just messing with you on purpose, where they'd be like, okay, well, you have a show in Montreal, we're at this particular border, it takes about an hour and a half to drive to Montreal, and they're just gonna let you sit there and time it so that they're going to let you leave at a certain point where you would actually get to the show just as you're supposed to go on stage, kind of thing. And he said that at first, you know what, it just seemed like really weird, but if it happens more and more and it's just sort of happened on a consistent basis, that it just seemed like they were fucking with them, basically, or fucking with them. Yeah, I mean, I've seen so many classic bands play shorthanded. I saw Emperor without a bass player, you know, just keyboards, guitar, drums, and vocals. And I've seen, I don't even know how many bands I've seen where, you know, it was just somebody was missing or a band couldn't get into the country. And it was so, it was just common. It was almost like you'd expected it, which is really weird because growing up in a town, or a city that is, you know, within an hour of the border, to us, you know, the border was more like an inconvenience because we'd always go down to Detroit or Buffalo to see shows, and it was always just like, oh, great, we got to deal with this again. But it was never like anybody was really afraid. Yeah.
I also think that, I mean, if you're touring as a band, it's just a very, I don't want to call it an easy target, but you know,
it isn't. It's a total. You're totally profiled, dude.
Yeah, I mean, profiling is a big thing at all borders, right? And if you have, especially some of the stories that you have in your book back in the '90s, if you just show up, I mean, I had to chuckle quite a bit with this one story that they basically converted a huge van to run on vegetable oil, and they were driving up to the border with like 200 gallons of vegetable oil just in containers in like inside the van. And Yeah, and I mean, also from my experience, like it's a little bit the same. Like Switzerland is so small. We would always go to holidays in like Spain and stuff. You know, border has never been, as you said. I think an inconvenience is the perfect word, because, you know, I mean, you're a family just sitting in a car with towing a caravan. Like, who's gonna stop you? But yeah, like also once I started touring with bands, it got pretty clear that, you know, that you're getting profiled pretty heavily. And I think it was really funny when we toured together just recently in January. Just maybe to put it into perspective, so we toured with Heilung, which is a group made of mainly Danish and Dutch people, and quite an international crew. You know, there's a German light engineer, me as a Swiss tour manager, and we were just on that tour and we had Ed as like a light production guy, and he's American. And then we got closer to the border, and I could just notice like how you Americans and Canadians just got more and more nervous. And we were just like, what's the deal? Because like from our perspective as Europeans who always travel with, like, if we have to go to the US, we have to travel with visas anyway. And from my experience, if you show up like in a, you know, we had quite a nice tour bus, I want to say. And if you show up with like a nice tour bus and everybody has European passports with, you know, the same visas and everything, we've actually rarely ever had an issue there. But you guys were, yeah, quite nervous, I guess.
Well, I think that one of the things that you'll notice about the stories in the book and stories you hear from people is that I think that as time has progressed, I mean, you're still going to get people who still think that musicians and people in bands are, you know, drug addicted scumbags and, you know, whatever you want to call them, however you want to characterize them negatively. But I think as the people who work down there start to see more and more bands and see more and more paperwork and see stuff being done by the book, that it becomes less of an issue because, oh, wait a second, you know, maybe they're starting to realize that this is a job. You know, as much as people glamorize or, you know, look at touring bands and the touring lifestyle as a big party, it's not. It's a job, and you have to do X, Y, and Z in order to get all your shit together in order to do it properly. So if you're doing it properly, then I'm starting to think that, you know, people are seeing this stuff and seeing more and more by the book stuff being done, and it's starting to seep into some of that consciousness maybe, because, you know, once in a while you still get that person who just doesn't get it, and it's usually someone older, which maybe also has something to do with it as younger people are being sort of drafted into these positions and stuff. But I mean, I remember this isn't band related, but I remember crossing the border with a buddy of mine. We were going down to one of the Decibel magazine metal and beer fest. No, it was like a one-day show basically. It was in Philadelphia, and we were basically going to drive down, go to the show, turn around, drive home. We're not staying overnight. We're just, you know, if we end up having to take a break outside the road, sleep in the car for a couple hours, whatever. But it was like in and out. We got to the border going into the States, and there was an older woman at the kiosk, and she just could not comprehend why we weren't staying overnight in Philadelphia. She's like, we're just going to this, we're going to this show, we're going to see the show, turn around, come home. She's like, well, why don't you have any luggage? Because we're not staying overnight. Well, why aren't you staying overnight? Because we're coming home. Well, why are you coming home right away? Why would you do that? Because there's no need for us to be there. So, you know, we get sent inside for secondary inspection. We go inside, and there's dudes in there who are like younger. The one guy had like a neck tattoo. So I'm like, okay, we're going to go see Converge, who was one of the bands we were playing. Some dude working has a neck tattoo. He must have heard of Converge, so you must know this, right? So we get inside. He starts asking us like, why did you get sent in here? Or what's the story? We're like, you know, we explain we're going down to Philadelphia. Who are you going to go see? We're going to go see Converge. We're going to go see whoever else was playing this particular Decibel show. And he's like, and you got sent in here, why? And we're like, I don't know. She just told us to come here. I don't think she believes that there's she thinks something shady with us not staying in Philadelphia. The dude just kind of looked at us and went, all right, we'll just get you out here as quickly as we can, guys. Don't worry about it. So it's almost like there's this chronological and cultural divide as well that's sort of working to help with the crossing procedure, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
I'd hope.
And one of the things you mentioned in the book also, and I think that rings very, very true to this day, you just don't ever really know what you're going to get, because you would think, you know, there's an enormous amount of rules and regulations, and if you want to cross because of this, you need, you know, document X, and then you need this. And I think between the US and Canada, which some of our viewers might not know, is that there's this Patriot Act in place. So the Canadian border guards can always see if you have a record, like a criminal record of sorts in the US. And I think a lot of reasons why people get turned away at the Canadian border is because they got like a DUI or something in the US.
That's primarily, yeah. I mean, for whatever reason, I don't know why Canada is so strict on DUIs in terms of looking at them as criminal activity. I've heard from bands who have been turned around at the Canadian border going back into the States, and they get asked going back into their own country, why are you coming back? And they're like, well, we got denied entry into Canada. And they'll be asked, well, why did you get denied entry into Canada? And they'll be like, well, so-and-so has a DUI. And they'll come right out and ask the border guard, you know, would that be a big thing in the States? And a US border guard literally told someone, a friend of mine, well, as long as that person's not driving, I don't see why it would be an issue. So right. I don't know. I mean, Canada's really strict on that. I mean, I know the US is strict on their own things as well, but yeah, that's one of the things that Canada's been strict on in the past. I don't know if I'm assuming that still exists, that sort of iron fist around DUIs.
I mean, you are Canadian, and there's a story, I think, where you almost were not allowed back into your country. How did that go?
Well, that's so I was rolling with Exhumed, and we were crossing from Burlington, Vermont, Plattsburgh, New York, that side, over to play a show in Montreal. And the ironic part about this whole story is that before what I'm going to talk about happened, 6 weeks earlier, the band was allowed into the country to play the Heavy Montreal Festival. No problem at the border. They were even told one of the guys had a DUI that was about to expire in the sort of like statute of limitations, whatever it's called, like the 8 to 10 year thing where it gets wiped off your record. And the one guy's was so far in the past that the border guard said to him, don't even worry about it. It shouldn't be an issue. So that was 6 weeks before going back to the very same border crossing. And I was rolling with them, and we basically showed up, and they said that because 4 out of the 6 people in the traveling party had DUIs, that they weren't going to admit us. Me going back into Canada is not an issue. And there was one guy in Exhumed who didn't have a DUI. And basically they said, turn around and go back to the States. They said that I was allowed to go in, and the dude who didn't have a DUI was allowed to go in. But at that point, it's like, well, what are we going to do? Walk to Montreal? There's nothing. We might as well just get back in the van and go back into the States with them. So technically, I was denied entry into my own country.
But speaking of walking into Canada, there's another story, right?
Yeah, but anyway, go ahead. So yeah, we turned back, and yeah, it's kind of weird because, like I said, 6 weeks before that, at that very same border crossing, they had no problem getting in. And like you brought up, it's very arbitrary, and it just kind of depends on who you get. I mean, I think there were a lot of circumstances as to what happened with that second border crossing that made it more of a hassle for the people working there that day. But and this is the one thing that frustrates a lot of people who are in touring bands and touring crew people and tour managers and stuff, that the consistency just is like, it ping pongs. Like, you never know what you're going to have happen. And it'll be a good example when we start talking about carnets later on, about just, sometimes you do all this paperwork and all this work and all this stuff, and it just never comes up when you're crossing the border.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that topic. Staying on the Canadian and US border, For us Europeans, I think if it's a European travel party, mostly it's the same, right? It can be super easy, and mostly it is. I've noticed it depends a lot on what kind of vehicle you roll up in.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's so arbitrary too. Like I had one instance with friends of mine in Vildhjarta, a Swedish band that I toured with, and to get into the country by plane, it was like weird, and there was a lot of questions and profiling and stuff. And then when we played the tour, we were like in this Bandigo Spinner, and we played 2 Canadian shows, and then we drove to Detroit, I think, through a tunnel, I think is
Yeah.
there between Canada and the US. And so this guy stops us at this kiosk and looks into the van, and a very serious face and everything, and we were like worried for the worst. Okay, cool. Like you have a couple examples in your book how it can take like up to 4 hours if they search every little pocket of everybody for drugs and everything. And we were like worried, okay, so here we go. And then the guy like, wait, what band are you guys? And then I think our guitar player was like, yeah, we're Vildhjarta, we play at so-and-so with Veil of Maya it was. And he was like, oh dude, no way, my brother is a huge fan of you guys, he's going to the show. Oh, can I have his t-shirt? Oh, can I give him can you sort me out with like a CD? And like I think he even ended up or like wanting to take pictures, and they were just like, yeah, okay, cool guys, enjoy the show. And like he rarely ever like looked at our passports, right? So yeah, it's really arbitrary in a good way sometimes. Like sometimes you're just really lucky, but sometimes it's hard.
But I do have to point out that recently, for whatever reason, and I wasn't even really aware of this until it happened, that getting into Canada from the States has gotten a lot easier in the last couple of years, where in the past you had to have all sorts of crazy amounts of paperwork laid out and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now you literally roll up with a letter of invitation from one or all of the promoters that shows that you're playing.
And they don't even have to file it anymore and stuff. It's very informal.
Yeah, your itinerary and your passport. And I mean, I have it on good authority from, who was it? Immolation. On their last tour, they crossed the border into Canada twice at 2 different border crossings, and both times didn't even get asked to get out of the van. Basically ran their passports, asked them what they were doing. They had paperwork for what they were doing, and said, all right, go ahead, have a good time. There you go. And it's like, okay.
A border as it should be, in my private opinion. But hey, staying on that border, do we want to talk about the US visa process? Because I think it got released this week. You wrote an article for Decibel magazine about the whole process of Europeans getting US visas. And I've actually prepared a little something. You haven't seen this yet. Let's see if I pick this up, or if I don't. Let's see. Ooh, does it work?
Oh no, look at this.
Yeah, I actually prepared something because as European bands, if you want to play in the States, and the distinction there is actually not to earn money, but as soon as somebody you play for has to pay to see you play, you need to get a P1 visa. And I mean, there's 2 ways. There's a P1 visa, which is internationally recognized alien and entertainer. And then there's another option to do this, an O1, which is then internationally recognized artist. There's a little technical difference, but we don't want to spend too much time on that. Actually, what I'm showing here now on the screen is the what you need to prove to the US government, and that's the USCIS, it's the agency, what you bring with you as a band. So yeah, so the first point, you have to prove that you've been established and performing for at least a year, and which applies to 2/3 actually of the members. So 2/3 of the members have to have been in the band at the time of application for the visa for at least a year. And then you need a petitioner. So you need a company in the US that will kind of vouch for you, and they have to have a minimum amount of turnover. I think it's 2 million by now per year that the petitioner has to have. So they have to be like an established company. And then you hear a lot of stories about how hard it is and how complicated. If you look at it from a distance, it's actually not, I mean, it's very technical. I mean, that's for sure. but some of it is actually quite straightforward, because basically the way I, at least, and we with Solver Productions, we offered it as a service to, liaise for the US visas. All they want to see is that you meet criteria, right? And the criteria are what I've laid out in this sheet. So you have to, prove that you have either been nominated, even though that's kind of optional if you have if you have enough other proof, but you have to show that you've been nominated or received awards, like, Emmys and stuff, if you want to go for the big ones. And then you have to prove that you have a starring role in productions or event with a distinguished reputation, whatever that means, evidence by reviews, press releases, contracts, whatever. You have to show that the group has international recognition, commercial success, and significant recognition for achievements from leaders in the field, which are basically recommendation letters from like industry big shots. And the last one I always think is really funny, because it says the group needs to command a high salary compared to others similarly situated. So it's like, if you tour with smaller bands, yeah, hey, so we're a grindcore band, we make $400 for this show, but actually these other guys only make 200, so we make twice as much. So that's I think always a very funny technicality about that. And but I think the much bigger topic always is how much money this costs, and for that I have to
actually I think what is very important to note about this entire process is that you have to have your tour dates booked and solidified basically before you even go into the visa application process, which to me seems very counterintuitive, because you basically have to have a tour booked before you can get the paperwork to allow you to tour.
Correct.
And that's
which is here, the starring role in productions or events with a distinguished reputation. So yeah, as you said, you need to confirm and announce shows before you can apply to play for them. And another big point, of course, is the costs. And I made a second sheet, and then I'm done, I promise, with my slides. But if you look at the cost factor that bands have to pay for this, it's crazy. You have to like hire an immigration attorney that helps you facilitate everything in the US with all their wording, and they need to be from the US. They have to have, I think, certain like legal permits and stuff. You need to actually join the musicians union, even though at the end of the day, I don't think you ever hear from them or they will ever do anything. The crew, the same for the crew. Then you have a filing fee for both band and crew, and every single person also to then fill out the form, DS-160. For the bands we work with, we always make them very much aware, like as soon as you have to do the embassy stuff, so you fill out that online form, it's a long list of very, very dreadful, very, very detailed questions about your father's first name to what they worked, to asking you whether you're planning to commit genocide in the US and all that stuff. And that would be one thing, but I think that the worst thing is that it's such a shitty system that always crashes. So literally, if it would be straightforward, it would take 20 minutes, but it always takes 2 hours. So whenever we send our bands that we work with the instructions, we're like, hey, okay, so this is going to be painful. Grab a set of comfortable, pants, go make yourself a nice cup of coffee, put on some meditation music, and then start, because it's going to be dreadful and very, very costly. Because if we took an example of 6 band, 6 crew, depending on how expensive the immigration attorney is that you hire, it's at least $6,000, and it can be up to 11, 12 grand if you need to file for expedited filing. So premium processing, I think it was called back in the day. So yeah, that's just to give a little overview on that process. So it's long and painful, and it's an incredible amount of paper. And yeah, if you're unlucky, it's 12 grand out of your pocket, which I think, especially for smaller bands, is a very, even for large bands, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's very prohibitive in that sense. But I think that what I've discovered, and the decibel piece that you're talking about is in the latest issue. It's got Enslaved on the cover, so check it out if you see it anywhere. But for that piece that I wrote, I spoke to a 3 or 4 immigration attorneys who work this process for bands coming over. And one of the things that they said is that there are very few, if any, in that stage of the process anyway, denials, because it's almost like, because it's a fee-based service, once you actually basically throw your hat into the ring for it, it's almost like, well, this person or this band is like, well, they have enough money to do this. It's almost like a formality that you're doing all this stuff. As long as you can shell out the cash, you will get the visa at some point. I mean, there are those moments when they'll ask you for more evidence because your paperwork hasn't satisfied the particular officer whose desk it landed on.
The dreaded RFE, request for evidence.
Yes. Yeah, they just ask you for like, who knows what evidence is. Yeah, but I mean, I haven't heard of, and no one's really sort of said anything to me about denials during that stage of the process. The denials come when you show up at the border and you haven't been forthcoming about your criminal past, and customs then looks at you and goes, oh, or immigration or whatever looks at you and goes, after they run your passport and see that you were arrested in a bar fight in 1993. And there you go. And then that's where it becomes an issue, I think.
And that's kind of a completely different authority, right? Like,
yeah,
I've had it a couple times at the border. I think I crossed into the US 13 times by now. Always extremely illegal because I'm very Swiss and anal about my paperwork. So, but I had one guy just tell me straight up, it's like, oh yeah, it's, it's nice that they approved the visa, but like, we still have to do our checks. Like, it's not necessary. I mean, I think it's a necessary prerequisite, of course, even to board the plane. But then the border officer, I think it's even that far by now that the border officers can even turn you away for, not for whatever reason, but I mean, they can come up with a reason, or they will find a reason that has nothing to do, or that for a question maybe that you weren't even asked during the visa process.
Right. And it should also be pointed out that the I don't know how many non-Europeans are checking this out or watching us and stuff, but the process for, at least for Canadians, the visa process, Canadian bands, the visa process is slightly less annoying. You don't have to provide stacks of reviews and evidence that you're a band. You don't have to go through the embassy interview. You do have to be a member of the musicians union. You do have to pay the filing fee and expedited fee if need be. But a lot of the paperwork, I guess, is excess for Europeans as opposed to Canadians. I don't know what it's like for Mexicans coming in to the States to tour, if they get out, especially with the particular president who's in office right now. But as far as I know, as far as Canadian bands, it's the process is not as laborious.
When you wrote that article and interviews a lot of people, did the current U.S. president come up a lot, or like, do people think or experience that it has changed ever since he has been in office?
It's funny because not necessarily. How do I put this? What I think the people I spoke to who have been immigration lawyers for long periods of time are noticing is that it changes. Yes, it changes depending on who's in office. Now, the one woman I spoke to was a lawyer in LA, and she not only just deals with bands, she deals with actors, models, all kinds of entertainment type people. And she says that, when after 9/11 happened and George W. Bush was in office, a lot of like the requirements were based around potential terrorism and the Patriot Act and all the stuff that was going on then. Then when Obama came in, it was a bit more culturally loose, like they actually wanted people to come in, and but they were still, they still had to sort of adhere to the regulations. With Trump in office, they basically are looking at, like we were talking about before, Buy American, Hire American, Baja. So instead of looking at, so one of the things that was told to me during the Obama administration was that they would look kindly upon repeat applicants. So if your band toured last year and you're filling out again, it would be like, okay, well, it would sort of expedite that process in that way, even though the system apparently doesn't save your information. Every time you reapply, you have to go through the whole process again, like filling out the same forms and the same questions, even though stuff that doesn't change, like your birthday, your social insurance number, your that stuff doesn't change, but you still have to input that apparently. Now, as I've been told, they look at like each application as your first time. It's almost like they don't want people to come in, as I've had it described to me. Like they don't really want you at the border. They don't want you to come in. So the process gets a bit more nitpicky, I guess you'd say. And also with anything, like, something that's existed over time, it's going to be refined and refined and refined. And with a bureaucracy, that just means more papers to fill out, more shit to sign, more questions to answer, because it's bureaucracy, and that's what they do best. So yeah, I mean,
they're also quite close-knit, tight-knit, what's the word? I think tight-knit agency, in that they don't really release a lot of numbers, right? And it's not that easy. I think you tried to interview the agency USCIS,
well,
but couldn't.
Yeah, I was told they have a no interview policy, which, it might not be so stringent on the no interview policy if I was Anderson Cooper or,
CNN.
Or somebody else, someone like that. But Decibel Magazine comes calling in, and I'm pretty sure, whatever, we're not going to talk to this jerk off. But I found these numbers where if I don't know if you have it in front of me or in front of you, I can look it up quickly. But I think it was 17,000. Yeah, 17,000 P1 visas approved in 2018.
Yeah.
No denials. And I mean, I don't know if, I was asking you the other day when we were talking about this, I don't know if that's what, in your opinion, is that a high number or a low number? Or, I mean, it seems in my mind, I don't know if also, I don't know if that's 17,000 bans or 17,000 individual visas.
I think it's 17,000 petitions, because it's always blanketed into petitions. And I did a quick math thing the other day, and I forgot about it, of course. And it's 17,000 petitions, and we assume an average of 6 people per petition, lands us like at 100,000 people.
Right.
But I think about the denials, they didn't give any number. But I also think, and you had that same experience from talking to to the people you interviewed, it's very rare that these get denied. But this has, I think, a very important reason. And we at Solver Productions, we also, and I'll be very honest here, we always say, hey, we have 100% approval rate with our P1s, because we do. Like every single P1 that we worked for our clients have been approved. But the small print, I think, behind that is bands where we're almost sure, or also the US attorneys that I know and appreciate to work with, if they're like, yeah, this is gonna work, like people are not gonna shell out the money. So in my opinion, as soon as somebody files the P1, I think they have a high probability to get an approval, because for them to even go that way, there's enough occasions before that to people to tell them, yeah, I don't think you should do this, because it's just gonna like shovel money into a hole.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, and it's a very unique system. I think that the US has. I mean, every country, of course, has different system. But in my opinion, or like in my experience, it isn't that painful as far as arbitrary handling of it goes. It just costs a lot of money, and it's just a lot of paperwork.
Yeah.
And it could be much easier, because yeah. And I mean, I'm a very pro open borders guy and stuff. But you mainly hear U.S. politics oftentimes talking about like reciprocity, I think is the word. So sometimes I'm wondering, like, I love all my friends in the US and all the bands that come to play here. And I'm very happy that this is so easy for them, because as a US citizen or a Canadian citizen, to come into Schengen, you don't need anything. Like, you land, you get a stamp for 3 months, and nobody asks any questions. UK, of course, completely different subject, as usual.
Right.
We're not even going to go there, I think.
I have no experience with the UK, so I have no opinion or knowledge of this of the situation.
It's not that painful for the US. For the UK, what you need, or I mean, this will change because of Brexit, most likely, or it might actually just be extended to also European citizens. Basically, as a European or European Economic Area, because that's European Union plus Norway plus Switzerland, then we don't need anything. It's just a freedom of movement, or has been until now. But US and Canadian, and also Chilean, and other countries. I say Chile because in Highland we have people from Chile, so I know the process. Basically, you just need a sponsor. So you need somebody in the UK, which is then almost always your promoter, who will kind of sponsor you.
Right.
And kind of vouches for you. So that's it. It's not that painful. It just takes a long time. And one of the main problems with the UK border, I think, is everybody's great there, and I've never had a major issue. But just due to the nature of touring, UK border crossings for bands are always at like 2 or 3 in the morning because you play in Paris the night before, you play in London the night after. So, you get on your bus and it's 3 or 4 a.m. Everybody had just played a great Paris show and maybe party a little bit. So I think as far as profiling goes, I think at the UK border, what they get to see as far as bands crossing the border goes, I think it must be pretty entertaining for them. And sometimes, if you're just there and you're as an American and you have to wait an hour or two just because they need to process the paperwork, even though it's just a pure formality, and they have like no good reason really to deny you. Like, honestly, I've been on a couple tours where at that border, UK border, I thought was, maybe if I would be a border agent right now, I would refuse this guy because he can barely like say his own name, let alone stand. But he has the paperwork, so here you go, sir. Welcome to the UK, which is great, But
there's actually that reminds me. There's a story in the book where the band Ingested were going. I can't remember which way they were going, either to or from the UK. But
UK
same
band,
thing.
Right?
Yeah, but I think they're from Scotland, farther up north. But okay, so maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was going into France. Either way, they played a show. Same thing. Party night. Right after the show, nobody got a chance to sober up, and there was one particular dude who in the midst of the party on their bus got naked, and by the time they got to the border was passed out and didn't have a chance to put his clothes back on. So when they all got pulled off the tour bus, dude was out there just completely stark naked and was told that before he gets allowed into the country, he's got to put some clothes on.
I mean, if that's your minimum standard to let people in, then, I like you as a country, really.
There you go.
But yeah, there's always this, and I think I want to tell my favorite, not because it was that funny story, but like, there's always this gray zone, or this is always this, once you've exited a country and haven't entered the next, you're like in limbo, right? You're not in this country anymore, but you haven't entered this one yet. So it's always this weird feeling of being in no man's land. And I remember it was a year ago, I was on tour with Elevati, this Swiss band, and we did a Latin America tour. And one other reality that people who aren't touring might not know is touring is hard, especially if it's tours like Latin America or Russia, where basically you have to fly in between every show, and then you have maybe 14 people in your travel party. So with Elevati, it's usually 8 people playing and 6 crew. It always depends a little bit, but still. So, so that costs a lot of money, right? So you almost have to play almost every single day. So like a day off is something that costs a lot of money. You have to pay crew, wages, you have to pay the band wages, you have to pay hotels, food for everybody and stuff. So basically a lot of bands, just to be most cost efficient, will just play. And we did that in Latin America. Like literally it was, I think, first Mexico City, and then the next day was Costa Rica, next day was Bogota, Colombia, next day was Santiago de Chile, next day was Brazil. So like every single day. So what that means is every single day you play a show. You are at the hotel maybe at 3 a.m. You get up for a 5 a.m. lobby call to get to to the airport to check into a flight and to fly to the next city. And if it's Russia or Latin America, like it's far, even in Canada it's far. Like for us Europeans, I mean, Zurich, Munich, come on, that's 4 hours. And it's like, oh, that's in another country, you know? So from our perspective, especially, so, you know, you'll end up being on a 5-6 hour flight sometimes, and then play a show that same day. So it's, of course, you know, very energy consuming. And, you know, you go to different places, you try different kinds of food, your stomach might not be that much used to it. And the drummer from Elevati, Alan, and I asked him if I can tell the story in public, and he said yes. I think he had fish in Costa Rica as like a dinner menu, and it was great, I think, but then he felt really weird. We still don't know whether it was the meal or just, you know, exhaustion or, yeah. And then we flew to Colombia, and it was a direct flight to Bogota. And we just were in the airplane, minding our own business. Everybody's just sleeping or like watching Netflix or playing Switch or whatever. And then we land in Bogota, and I think I was taking a nap on the plane. And I wake up, and I just kind of turn around to like check whether everybody's, you know, still here, which I guess they are because we're on an airplane. But then I just see Alan sitting there, like just really pale, like really, really pale. And he just didn't look good at all. And he tried to stand up, and immediately his pale face kind of turned into green. It was very weird. And then he just collapsed. So we landed in Bogota. People were already leaving the plane. We were in the very back of the plane. And he just passed out because, yeah, he was just really unwell. Just lying there on the floor, just you know, unconscious. So a very scary moment. Everybody was in kind of a shock. At the same time, the airlines were like ushering people out because, of course, you know, they want to keep their turnover time as low as possible, yada, yada, yada. So in the spur of the moment, I just like told one guy to, hey, just grab his stuff, you know, go through customs and whatever, and just wait for us. I'll stay with here as a tour manager and take care of him and you know, see what happens. And so yeah, they took all my stuff and his stuff. I had my passport in my back pocket, and yeah, unfortunately his passport went with the other guys through the border, which at that moment I didn't think of or think about yet. So we were just in that airplane corridor at the very back, and my Spanish is not great. I mean, I can get around a little bit. I can order food and stuff, you know, and I can, like, you know, I get a lot of what people are saying, but it was just very hard. But the airline was Avianca, and their staff was absolutely amazing. But then the problem we had was Alan was still unconscious, laying in the corridor of the plane. There's 3 women talking to me in Spanish. I try to kind of explain them the situation, and they're just like, passport, passport, passport. And I'm like, yeah, sorry, the passport is gone. And then it slowly start to dawn on me why that is a problem, because we had an ambulance waiting in front of the plane, and there was also a border guard and like an immigration officer with the ambulance, and they just refused to let him come out of the airplane without a passport. Because all that would mean is, even if it's just the hospital at the airport, as soon as he touches Colombian ground without having his passport stamped, he's kind of like an illegal alien, you know, immigrant, whatever. Yeah. So they were just talking to me, passport, passport. I was like, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Like, here's my passport. And I opened my phone and I showed them on my Dropbox, you know, like a scan of his passport. Like, this is him. This is, you know, he's Swiss. Like, just help him. And not because I think you should help Swiss people more than others, but just, you know, kind of like, hey, like, he's not illegal, like, you know. But it was just very tense, and Alan just got paler and paler, and I just started worrying more. And then it was just a very clusterfuck of a situation until like one lady just started shouting at the immigration officer in a sense of like, hey, let's just help this guy already. And he just kept serious. I was like, no, like, he needs his passport. Yeah, but we don't want to have him die here and stuff, I think was what they said pretty much. And then after a lot of back and forth, the Avianca lady just kind of said, okay, like, I'll go with him with my airport badge and vouch for him, and you have to run away, like, you have to run after your friends and get his passport and then come back. So we kind of split up. And then we went to the terminal building, and in the terminal building there was this other guy from the band with the passport in hand trying to get back to the gate, but then they didn't let him because they thought he was a security threat because he had a passport which wasn't his. And it was a real clusterfuck. I was just really happy that Alan was finally helped at the end of the day. And then they were just like, yeah, just go to the Avianca counter and they should radio whatever lady's name that was. She gave me like a paper with her name on it. And so I crossed immigration. They asked me a lot of questions like, so what did you do in these 30 minutes between the plane landing and now crossing the border? Like, so, yeah, well, there was this incident and stuff. But then also Avianca staff came to help me and they let us through. And then we were finally reunited with him at the airport hospital, where we brought the passport to the immigration officer still waiting there. He walked back and went to like retrospectively stamp his passport and came back and everything was in order. And so the border problem was solved. And also Alan, his stomach bug, they gave him some fluid. We still don't know what it was, but he just drank it. It was like a, like a effervescent, like a fizzy thing that they put into water, and he drank it. And within 3 minutes, he felt like he was a newborn baby. So that was also kind of weird. We still don't know what that was. But yeah, wow. That's my biggest, I think, story of, being many thousand miles away from home in a country where you barely speak the language, and you're just stuck in a situation where somebody needs help urgently, but just doesn't get it because of some formality. So yeah, there you go. Luckily he was able to get around that. Yeah, but yeah, that was a long story anyway. But, should we maybe finish our talk with the last topic that we've kind of penciled out, which is traveling with gear and merch, because that's a whole other story, right? I mean, you as a person, if you have your visa, if you have your entry stamp, it's all good. But sometimes, for gear, you need something a little bit more.
Well, it's funny. I even going back to my playing days, we never officially ever had anything, stamped, signed, like a carnet, whatever you want to call it. But we were always told, to have a list of everything that you have with you in your van with serial numbers and all that kind of stuff, which we did on just a printed piece of paper. And I remember we did a couple tours like that where we had stuff printed out, ready to go. And never once have we ever been asked for anything. I remember once I talked to a dude a while ago who was tour managing Carcass, and they were coming into Canada from the States and get pulled in, et cetera, and they had a carnet. And the guy at the counter was just one of those guys who's, every job's got an asshole. Like you could work in the best place in the world or the best job, your dream job. There's just going to be one dick there. And I guess this was the guy, because he basically came to the tour manager and said, randomly pointed at something on the sheet of paper and go, I want you to show me what that is. And it turns out it was like an effects rack in one of the guitar players, like his rigs. So they had to dig through the trailer, pop open a thing, show it to him, show the serial number, and he's like, okay, fine, and then let them go. It's almost like he's just nitpicking and being a busybody or something. Yeah, being difficult because he could.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with carnets is very, there's a lot of different stories depending on the border too. So basically a carnet, what a carnet should do, right? Is
I guess we should explain what that is, right?
Yeah. So a carnet is basically, I think usually it's colloquially called like equipment passport. So it kind of gives the local authority the guarantee that all the gear that's coming in is going out again. And you kind of vouch for that by paying a deposit in your home country. So what it means is you tour with all this gear, you have a carnet, you need to stamp it when you go in, stamp it when you go out. And basically it means that you don't have to pay import taxes, because otherwise if you import a lot of gear, and that gear is oftentimes worth a lot of money, like 50 to 100 grand, depending on the band. So you have this to kind of avoid having to pay taxes, because they know that this is not an import, but it's just a temporary use of professional goods. It's, I think, the technical term for it. And it's really funny, like how different it is at every single border. Like Mexico, as much as I love the country and the people and playing there and everything, has one of the I think most arbitrary systems when it comes to the whole gear handling. Like I've been to Mexico with a carnet, and they were like, oh, so you have a carnet, so you have to pay $1,000 handling fee for the carnet, and which shouldn't be supposed to be doing, right? And then the next time I was like, yeah, fuck it, we'll just go with other carnet, and we went with a carnet, and they're like, oh, you don't have a carnet, so you have to pay $1,000 import tax. I was like, yeah, okay. So it doesn't really change that much sometimes, but of course, if you go by the book.
So my question on that is, as somebody, so if you're coming, like, how quickly does the carnet process go through? By that, I mean, if you are obviously bringing your own gear, you have enough time beforehand to sort of say, okay, I'm going to go through everything, mark down what's what, get the serial numbers and everything. But if you're renting gear, when you get to wherever you're going, does that have to be declared as well? Or is it just, it's just sort of like, okay, because it's already in the country, you don't have to worry about it?
As long as you don't cross borders with it, you don't need to worry about it. But if you go to, like we did with Heilung, we went to the US and then we also played Canada. So we had PRG, our tech supplier, just apply as a carnet. And we had a carnet for the whole Heilung gear, which has a couple of stories to tell as well. Because I don't know how many of our viewers right now know Heilung, but Heilung is this wonderful band, like we already mentioned, from Denmark and the Netherlands. It's more of a Viking art performance, I want to say, like a very ritualistic approach of they call it amplified history. I think is the genre that they call it. So it's not really it's not a rock show in any sense of the word. It's a big ritual. You have a lot of people on stage dressed up as warriors, and yeah. So, and they also have quite some interesting stage decoration. And for us as a production company, it's always really funny to think about the ramifications this has, because they have a lot of props on stage, like animal skins, animal bones that they use as instruments and stuff. So I remember this one particular instance where we were actually making the carnet for this year's run, and we had to translate it to Russian, because if you want to go into Russia with a carnet and it's in English, they're just gonna not deal with it. So we had to translate it to Russian, and through our cargo provider, we talked to this Russian agent. And I remember this email that I received from him. Where is oh yeah, here. And he wrote me, so on your list it says ox leather decoration with goat teeth. Could you just tell me what material that is made of? Is that plastic? And he's like, no, it's ox leather made out of ox, and goat teeth made out of goat. Oh, okay. And then he was like, oh, is it the same with the goat skin? These are real, huh? And they're like, yeah, these are real. Oh, okay. Well, good luck with that. So that was always funny. I love touring with Heilung, especially because of these challenges, it faces, but sometimes it's also very funny, and especially as a band, so like imagine, and I also get it from that side, imagine being a border agent and you get 16 or 20 sometimes with Heilung, really hairy, beardy dudes, and then you go through their paperwork and it says like ox skins, goat teeth, chicken bones, and like, what are these, but it's actually funny because and I think the people in Heilung actually spend quite some time by now too to look into different countries and different regulations, what kind of animal parts, so to speak, they are allowed to bring into country X and country Y. So we have quite a good list together there, but carnets are sometimes it's quite absurd at the same time. But I mean, merch is another topic, I think, which is a big one for Canada as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, I haven't personally ever had this experience where you show up at a border and you get taxed whatever amount on merch. I've heard so many stories about it, but it's never personally encountered it. But I'm not even sure, maybe you know this. So when you're going from, and I know that there's a particular difference when you cross from, say, I guess, New York State, Vermont, Maine into Quebec versus anywhere else in the country. They sometimes look a bit more rigorously at merch, and there's like a textile law or tax or something like that. I'm asking you if you know this, what is the what's the tax rate on something, and like how is it determined?
I mean, it always depends, and that's true what you mentioned. In Canada, it always also depends on the state law, right? So Quebec has maybe a separate GST or a VAT that's charged
Yeah.
on, for specific goods, whereas other states might not have it. Because also in the US, it's very different from state to state, but there they actually don't really care about merch at all. I mean, another border that I personally know really well because it's close to my home is the Swiss border, and a lot of touring bands always complain about having to pay merch at the Swiss border. And it's true, we're not part of the European Union. We are completely independent as far as customs and everything go. So in theory, whenever you import goods for sale, you have to pay, right now it's a 7.6% tax on everything that you intend to sell, kind of as a deposit. And then when you
Okay.
go out, you declare just the amount that you actually sold, and then you get the remainder of what you have unsold back. So, basically you go into the country, you pay customs on the whole thing, and then whatever you didn't sell, you get it back once you leave. But that, of course, in itself can pose also their own, their own problems, because as you might know, Switzerland has 4 official languages. We are a very, very diverse country. We have the German-speaking part, French-speaking part, Italian-speaking part, and then the Romansh-speaking part, which is way deep in the mountains. But it's, as much as we're coherent as a country, there's still, these little conflicts sometimes going on. And in my experience, it's, if you're really unlucky and you enter the border on the Geneva side, so like the French side, and you exit it towards Milan, so towards Italy, and you'll just have that exact same paperwork, which is, I think, very straightforward. But then they're like, yeah, no, they did this wrong at the French crossing. You need to call them and change this and change that. And then if you go the other way around, it's the same in Geneva. When you try to exit, they're like, no, the Italians, they always do their stuff wrong. Here, you need to call them and have it fixed. But it's just the same thing. And one of my favorite stories in this regard, now it's much easier, because if you go into Switzerland now, you can just pay the deposit on a credit card, and when you go out again, you can just get it, the difference charged back to your credit card. So there's no cash handling. I used to tour with this band. I'm not going to say their name, but there were some very old school US dudes, and they wanted to do everything cash. And they had some, which of course I appreciate, and I do if that's what they want. But then we came in through quite a large border crossing. I think it was Basel, so coming in from Germany, and they paid like 4,000 maybe bucks it was for merch deposit, because it was the beginning of the tour. We wanted to do everything by the book, yada yada. And then we left the border because I think some road was closed, or I don't remember, at this very tiny, small border crossing station in the mountains towards Italy. And we showed up, and I had all my paperwork in order, and I think I was supposed to get like 3,200 or something back. And I walked up to the guy, being Swiss, talked to him in our own language, and he just kind of turned pale as well. And he was like, so what's the problem? It's like, yeah, we don't have that amount of money here. We're such a small crossing. I was like, huh, okay. So what should we do? And he was like, no, I'm just going to call my boss. He can just take his car and drive across the pass to this bank to get the money back. So, and then he'll drive back, but it will take 2 hours. Do you have these 2 hours? And then I was like, because it was like 5 a.m. or whatever, and we were only supposed to play Milan, which was another 2 hours just over the border. So it's like, yeah, whatever. Went back into the tour bus for a 2-hour nap. And yeah, exactly on the dot, because we're Swiss, 2 hours later, I heard a knock on like the bus door, and the guy showed up with a smile and like his envelope with the money. So it was like, okay, cool, thanks, and went about our day. So at least it ended in a positive way, but that was very funny, I thought.
How strict are they in when you're going in and out of Switzerland on merch? Because when I went from, I think it was Italy into Switzerland last year, and then Switzerland into France, didn't get asked anything about merchandise, or it never even came up.
It's a thing that the Swiss like to do. I don't think, well, technically, when you, and that's like actually kind of a gray zone. If you want to be very precise about it, there's almost no way to actually do it right, because if you buy, let's say as a band, you buy your 5 boxes of merch in Germany, then you have paid European VAT, so you have paid European tax. So if you go into Switzerland, you need to pay the tax for Switzerland. But in theory, because you're exporting the goods from the European Union, you would get the European Union tax back, right? Because the goods are now no longer in the European Union, but in Switzerland. So, and they can only be taxed for one region at the same time, technically. But nobody ever does that, right? But technically, if you cross into Switzerland, you would first need to stop at the German, say, border and be like, hey, so we're exporting this 19% VAT that they have in Germany, please give it back. And then into Switzerland, you pay 7.6%. So it's, you know, actually make some money for a second. But yeah, but nobody does that. So basically, if you leave Switzerland, nobody cares. Like the only stuff people care sometimes about if you leave Switzerland, but that has also gotten much better. In Switzerland, we're a bit more liberal when it comes to the consumption of some drugs, soft drugs like marijuana. So especially going to Italy for a while, there has been a lot of like checks, you know, when you exit into Italy, if you're bringing something from Switzerland. But yeah, like by now, honestly, it's gotten a lot better. But it's actually also kind of absurd to talk about this right now, because actually right now all the borders are closed, right? It's crazy. Like, I'm 33 years old now, and I've never thought I'd ever see, you know, the day where all the borders are closed. It's crazy. So right now that's not a problem, but you know, but it really
it'll be interesting to see what happens when stuff starts clearing up and cleaning up, where you have countries that are harder hit with coronavirus. Like, are they going to be stricter measures between Switzerland and Italy, because Italy's been hit so hard, but not so much on the other side? Because I haven't really heard much like doomsaying from France, but everybody's being hit, but you know what I mean? Like right now, the US is, what are they saying, the biggest or the most number of confirmed cases in the world, like even surpassed China at its height. So how is that going to play out when we want to go back and forth between Canada and the US whenever stuff starts getting back to normal?
I mean, that's a very different topic that we could easily fill another hour with, I think. But I'm also really wondering, you know, what direction this is going. Will it ever be the same again? Or like, you know, will there now, if you go on a plane with a band, or as a person, doesn't matter, where you have to have your liquids checked, and maybe now you will have your temperature checked, or, you know, temperature scanned or measured. We will see. But I mean, as far as the Swiss border goes, to kind of close that circle, coming back to what we talked about in the beginning, it's also very arbitrary. Sometimes I feel like some people just wave you through, some people stop you, and some people will stop your van and search it. I've personally never been in my touring career, and I've crossed that Swiss border a lot. Have never actually seen them completely dissect like a vehicle. That might also be because I'm Swiss, so I'm not sure. Like I hear a lot of stories from other bands who spend, you know, a couple hours at the border waiting because, you know, they're just searching their complete vehicle. So yeah, but I have a feeling it's getting a bit more easy and a bit more laid back. But then again, the law is the law, and even if you're not stopped, you technically have to, and that's out of question, stop and declare your merch, right? But of course, you know, I mean,
do you have anything to declare?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is the title of your book. And maybe do we want to close out the? Oh, maybe we can, because I think what we're talking until it's on YouTube is like a 2-minute delay. So if actually anybody's even watching, I don't even see that anywhere. If you have any questions you want to ask about bands crossing borders, please, you can type them now and we can maybe address them later. But do we still want to, we talked about whether that's a good idea, but do we still want to close that talk with like your favorite story from your book?
No, I mean, I think that would just take too long. I do have a recent story, kind of pertaining to what we were just talking about with merch and Quebec, that I could probably finish off on. That'd be it would be a lot less time spent. So anyway, it involves the band Wake from Alberta, and I was told this by their the guitar player recently. he was telling me about, and this kind of goes to the merch, or speaks to the merch topic, and also to the idea of just how arbitrary things can get. So Wake is going from Quebec into Maine, I believe, and they had their visas, so everything's squared up that way. And they had a few boxes of merch in their van. They get to the border, they declare everything, they get pulled inside, and the guy starts going through stuff. And at first I was told that he actually didn't understand what the visa was in their passport, so he had to call his supervisor. And this was, I guess, early in the morning, late at night kind of thing as well. He had to call somebody to ask what a P1 was.
Oh.
So they went through that. It was an older guy, so I guess, you know, he's not used to it. It was a smaller border crossing, I presume. So yeah, he called a supervisor, got that sorted out, and then they were starting to get hassled about merch. And the guys in the band, they're like, well, this is our merch here. This is all we have. Here's they had an invoice from where they got printed, and it was printed by a company in the States, shipped back to Canada for their tour, and being brought into the States for whatever balance of the tour was left. So the guy's like, starts looking through stuff, starts making phone calls, and the band is just kind of sitting there going, oh no, what now? When they see them making phone calls. And he basically said that he was going to have to deny them for lying to them at the border. And the guy's like, well, what do you mean? What are we lying about? He's like, I'm going to give you one opportunity to tell me, well, like, where did this merch come from? Like, where did this get made? And he's like, well, we got it printed in the States and shipped to Canada, and we have it with us. Here's the invoice from the company that printed it up, blah, 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 blah. So he goes back to wherever, comes back a few minutes later, and he's like, listen, one more time. You guys are lying to me. One more time to I'm going to give you one more time to tell me the truth. Basically, what was going on was that this all boiled down to the fact that the shirts on the label said made in China.
Oh.
So he thought the entire shirt, including the whatever was printed on it, was made in China and was being improperly declared. And they almost got denied because of that, because of some guy who just didn't get it. And this is, you know, it speaks to kind of the frustration of things, and it speaks to the, you know, lack of consistency. It speaks to just people not knowing. And I think, you know, in writing that piece that I did for Decibel and in writing that book, I think two of the things that stood out the most were one thing is that the people who are working in a lot of these positions in government agencies and stuff like that don't really have a strong grasp or a grasp at all of how touring lifestyle works. When they think touring, and, you know, automatically someone thinks like Green Day, Metallica, like just big names, whatever, and they think everybody else is. It's like they don't understand it. It takes a while to get to that point. You know, you have to like slog it out a few years and eat shit for a while in order to like do that. And part of that is, you know, living in a van and, you know, smelling other dudes' farts for a few weeks and all that fun stuff. And secondly, and then secondly, a lot of the immigration lawyer, I mean, pretty much every immigration lawyer I spoke to for that piece said that what they would like to see different is the sort of process where you have to, the counterintuitive process that I spoke to earlier, where you have to have all your shows booked before you start the process, where it's like every band from the Rolling Stones on down to, like, you know, bargain basement porno grind band, every band has to do the same thing. And they don't understand as immigration lawyers why that is. It's almost like if somebody's going to put in the time and energy to book a tour for you, to, you know, promote these dates, it should be pretty evident that this is going to happen, and we shouldn't have to prove it to you again. And that's one of the frustrating points that the sort of, I don't know what you want to call them, I guess the lawyers are kind of all up in arms about, and plus how long the process takes, because a lot of the process now is still looking back to the way things used to be, where it took a longer time to book tours and you had to, like, you know, do things over the phone and play phone tag with somebody and fax machines and blah, 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 blah. Whereas now I'm sure you could do this yourself. If you wanted to book a tour for a band, you could probably book a solid 2-week tour for a band, like pretty quickly using
Not sure how
technology the way
solid
it
it
is.
would be, but yeah.
Or a decent enough tour for a band, like a mid-sized or small band, you could probably set something up for somebody pretty quickly using technology the way it is. And I think that a lot of the people who work with this process are frustrated that while the world is moving forward in terms of technology, easy travel, well, we say this now, but travel's not an issue now, but I mean, cheap flights and wiredness and connectivity and all this kind of stuff, that process is kind of moving backwards in a way where it's not taking advantage of how quickly things can move these days. So there you
go. Definitely. And I think, yeah, that's a good final thought. But, it's just hard to keep track of everything too. I mean, how many countries are there in the world?
192.
92.
I believe 192. And none of them are going to the Olympics this year.
But it's sometimes also hard to keep track of all of it, and we as a production company who are kind of in charge of getting the band to where they need to be, we try, but sometimes things really just take you by surprise, or you haven't really paid attention. And there's a lot of countries now adding like ETAs, electronic travel authorizations. And of course, if you go to the country's website, it's very obvious that now you need to do this, but maybe it didn't get the necessary coverage in the news over here and stuff. Australia just instated one, and New Zealand as well, and a while back Canada, which still takes a lot of European travelers by surprise, actually, that they need to have an online, it's not a visa, it's just a travel authorization, like the ESTA for the US. But yeah, it's an evolving and interesting topic. But yeah, right now you can't go anywhere anyway. So.
And who knows when we'll be able to next.
Correct. So yeah, we said between 45 and 60 minutes, and now we're 1 hour 20. So we babbled a good amount. Let me just check.
No questions?
There's one question about the Brazil thing, but I'm not gonna get into it because we had some problems with elevator in Brazil, but it didn't have anything to do with crossing the border. So we're just not gonna go there. But it was a great time. It's still there. Other than that, I don't see any questions, at least the window that I see. So yeah, do you have anything else to declare?
Not really, no. I get to actually go to my home in a couple of days. That's pretty
nice.
Neat.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's also, being on tour constantly. Last year, I've been on tour a lot, so it's actually nice just be at home, and even you don't have a choice, right? So yeah, so in that sense, I wish you nice homecoming in 2 days. Thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you for writing that book. Thank you for being amazing on the tour that we did together. And yeah, I think this concludes this episode. Thank you very much for watching, if anybody did. And we'll see you soon.
Great, man. Thank you very much.